it's Christy. Welcome to day 11 of my 2018 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Little Angels stamp set by MFT. So I'm stamping out the images I'll be using on some Copic friendly cardstock with Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers today. For my angel's skin, I'm using E00, E02, and E11. Starting with the E11 and drawing in some shadows up under her hairline and then pulling that out with the E02. And then I decided to do her neck and hands and feet at the same time. They're such small areas that it's just easiest to do it all at once. So I just used the darkest two shades on her feet, but on her face and hands I will blend out with the E00. And then I'll add in some rosy cheeks with the R20. I went over those twice to build up the saturation and then blended the edges with the E02 to soften it into the rest of her face. For her hair, I'm using E40, E41, and E43. And I'm going to start lightest to darkest in this case because I really wanted it to be very pale. I didn't want to get too heavy-handed, and so I just wanted to start light and build my color up. I do that whenever I'm unsure with the area that I'm coloring. That way it's a lot easier to add in color, but it's much harder to take it away. So I'm basically following the lines that the artist has drawn and then adding in a few extras to give her some different strands of hair. I started with the E40 and then added the E41, and now I'm going to come in with the E43. I'm going for an ash blonde or a very pale brown, something that will be in high contrast to the dark background that I'm going to be creating later. As I'm coloring, I'm making sure to use the very tip of my marker and a really light pressure so that I can get those nice thin strokes. I'm working my way back down to my lighter two shades now. I'm using the E41 to soften up that E43 just a little bit, and then I'll also come in with my E40. And right about here is when I realized that there wasn't quite enough contrast. I do like a lot of contrast in my coloring, so I decided to add in the E44 and just do a few extra strokes with that shade. Hair is one of the things that I find most challenging to color. I don't do much of it since I tend to color critters most often, but I think it's nice to change things up every once in a while. So I just take my time with it and, do things slowly, build the color up and down until I'm happy with the results. So once I've laid in all of that E44, I'm going to work my way back down again through all three of the other shades just to soften things up and get it to kind of blend, but not too much. I still want there to be that definition. For the angel's dress, I'm using Y0000, Y11, and Y13. I wanted to create some folds in the fabric of her dress so that it looks like it's rippling as she flies through the air. So I'm starting with the Y13 and drawing in some lines that follow the curve of the dress. And then I'm going to come in with the Y11 and color a line just below that, and then also pull it a little bit higher so that the color starts to fade off as it goes up the gown. Once I have the Y11 all laid in, I'm going to come in with the Y000 and do the same thing. So I'm not coloring over the previous two shades, I'm coloring just below each line and pulling the line higher as I go up her dress as well. Once I'm happy with the bottom, I'll go ahead and do my shading at the top of her dress. I'm adding some E13 on the underside of her sleeves and then a little bit around her neck, especially on the right side since her head is just slightly tilted in that direction. And then I'll blend out with the Y11 and then I'll come in with that Y00 as my highlighted shade. Just fill all the rest of that in. I'm going to color the flower in her hair to match, So I started with the Y13 in the center, and then I'm blending out with the Y11, and then finishing with the Y000. To darken up that center, I brought in the Y15, and I used that to color in her shoes as well. For her wings, I'm using B00 and B00, and I'm starting with the B00 and adding a little bit of shading to the underside of each of the little ruffles of her wing. So I'm just doing kind of like a little line with an extra bit right under her arm. And then on the other wing, I'm going to do exactly the same on the underside of each of those ruffles. And then I'll come in with the B00 and just soften up that edge. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to let the rest just fade into white. I wanted my bird to look like a dove, like a gray dove. So I'm using the R20 for her belly, just laying that in first. And then I'll come in with my E70 and E71. I'm using the E71 for my shadows and then pulling that color out with the E70 and softening up the edges of the pink belly with that as well. And then I'll trim these out with the matching dies. For my background, I've got a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to be blending on some Distress ink in the shades Peacock Feathers, Chipped Sapphire, and Black Soot. I'm starting with the Peacock Feathers and building up that saturation until I'm happy with it. Then I'll come in with my Chipped Sapphire, and I'm kind of creating a halo effect with the lightest portion in the very center. I'm not worried about the bottom because that's going to get covered up on the final card. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to bring in the Black Soot, which is going to really darken things up around the edges. So I'm going to be a little bit more sparing with that color. And then I'm going to actually work my way back down through all three of those shades again. So I'm going back to my Chipped Sapphire, and then I'll go back to the Peacock Feathers as well and fill in the middle. Once I'm happy with how that's looking, I'll bring in my Tim Holtz Distress Sprayer and give that a few spritzes of water. Let that sit for a couple seconds and then blot that up with a paper towel. And I'll do that 2 or 3 times until I'm happy with the results. So those dots were just to add some texture and maybe be some distant stars, but I also want to add some nice bright flecks as well. So I'm taking some Copic opaque white and adding a little bit of water to that. I'm going to stir that up with an old paintbrush and then flick that all over my background. Then I'll set this panel aside to dry. For my sentiment, I'm taking some Versamark ink and I'm going to heat emboss my sentiment onto some black cardstock. So I first treated that with my EK Success Powders tool, and now I'm stamping out that sentiment with that clear sticky ink. I'll go ahead and dip that into some white embossing powder, and you can see I'm actually doing 2 sentiments because I was making 2 cards at once. I don't normally do that, but since this one was a little bit of a labor-intensive card, I thought it'd be good to get 2 out of the one kind of crafty session. So I'll heat up that embossing powder until it turns nice and bright and shiny, and then I'm going to trim those down with one of the banner dies from the Blueprints 29 MFT Dynamics. Before I put my Misty away, I'm going to stamp on the inside of my card. I'm using Lawn Fawn's Peacock ink to stamp another one of the angels and a little cluster of stars, and the sentiment that says, "Sending blessings of all good things your way." I trimmed down my background with the single stitch line tag corner rectangle frames dynamics, and I'm actually going to be using all 3 pieces, so they're going to fit back together like this. I'm going to start with the outside piece first and adhere that down using my Lawn Fawn glue tube. And I chose this glue just because it has a very thin nozzle, so you get a really small bead of glue, so it works perfect for those delicate little areas. And then I'm going to line that up on my card front. I flipped my card upside down. Sometimes I have an easier time lining things up when they're upside down. I don't know why, but I wanted to make sure that that was nice and straight on the card. Then I'm going to fit in the actual frame, but not adhere it. And then I'm going to fit the inside into that frame like a puzzle piece. Then I'll pull off that frame and take a B99 marker, and I'm just going to do a thin line right around the inside edge of each of those little sections, just in case things don't line up perfectly. That way you won't see that bright blue cardstock behind. It'll kind of just fade all together. And because I pressed down so lightly, you won't even see that transfer onto the inside of the card. I've added some 1/8 of an inch score tape all around the inside edge of that frame, and I'm going to peel off the backer sheet and then line that with a piece of acetate that I have cut down to match perfectly. I'm going to be filling the card with a mix of some different shaker materials, but before I do that, I wanted to add some stars to the background, and I really wanted them to stay exactly where I wanted them to go. So I'm taking a little bit of Ranger Multimedia Matte and dabbing that onto my background, and I'm going to pick up some tiny silver stars from Pretty Pink Posh and just set those down into place. That way when I give this card a shake, at least some of the stars will remain in the sky. The rest of the stars I'm just going to pile in the center, and then I'm also going to add some sparkling clear sequins in 4 and 6 millimeter sizes. I'm going to add some gold sequins in the 4 millimeter size, and I'm also going to take some Lawn Fawn iridescent chunky glitter and add a pile of that into the center as well. The bottom of the card is going to be covered by this cloud background, so I laid that into place so that I can see where I want to put a little bit of additional foam tape that would kind of keep the sequins towards the top half of the card. And then I'm going to peel off that release paper. I've also added some thin strips of foam tape to the back of the entire frame. Now, if you wanted this shaker material to really be able to move a lot, you may want to double up, but I wanted to keep things pretty flat for mailing purposes, so I just added 1 layer, and I don't mind that it doesn't shake up, that it doesn't flow quite as freely. That doesn't bother me. I'm going to add a couple extra little thin strips of foam tape to the corners to support that cloud background. I added some Ranger Multimedia Matte to the back of that cloud because I wanted it to stick to the acetate. And then I realized right here that I had accidentally grabbed the wrong background. That one was for the other card, so I just pulled that right back off, and then I grabbed the correct one for this card and pop that down into place so that it covers up all of that foam tape. I'll add some liquid glue to the back of my sentiment banner and then line that up toward the bottom of the card. Then I'll grab my angel, and I'm going to adhere her with the Ranger Multimedia Matte as well, since she's going directly onto that acetate, and I wanted her to really stick and not fall off the card. And then the little dove I'm going to tuck right on top of that sentiment banner. To finish off the card, I'm going to take a sprinkle of all the different sequins that I used inside the shaker card and add a few of them to the cloud border. And by the way, that cloud border was from Lawn Fawn. Then I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see all the sparkle and shine, and give you another peek at the inside as well. And then there you can see that shaker material in action. Like I said, it doesn't move around too much since there's only 1 layer of foam tape, but it definitely spreads throughout the background. And then there is the additional card, which is exactly the same. I just love these sweet little angels. I think they make such a peaceful and serene Christmas card. Definitely something different. So I hope you guys have enjoyed day 11 of my 2018 holiday card series. If you did, please be sure to give the video a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to my channel. If you want to keep watching, here's 2 videos from day 11 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series, so you can click on either one of those. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.